everybody, so people get to know each other, and also for Joel and Thomas to get to see who you are and where you are calling from. For people, I don't think anybody's here for first time. Hi, Michael, welcome.
Hi, Michael.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody here for first time, but the idea for Joel and Thomas is that this is the network of supervisors from Americas. Sometimes we have guests from other parts of the world, but most supervisors are located in Canada, United States, and Central and South America. That's the reason why we call this America's Supervisor Network. So we started with Lily's network with the goal to bring more awareness of coaching supervision through the work of supervisors who can support each other with that goal. So we have different guests every month, once a month, talking about different issues related to supervision as a way for supervisors to keep learning. But we also open this network to anybody who wants to participate. So sometimes we have coaches who are not supervisors but are interested or curious about supervision. So it's a network open, free for anybody who wants to participate. And we have different speakers every month. And we have a speaker from EMCC coming last month talking about the credentials that they have for coaching supervisors in EMCC. And so we want to be sure we have some participation from ICF sharing with us what the paper that you wrote, the research you are doing, some of the things that you have found out, what you have been doing around supervision. And so every month we have different guests. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
So why don't we go around the room really fast and you introduce yourself, saying your name and where you are calling from, and maybe if you're a supervisor or not, so Thomas and Joel get to know you a little bit better. And so it's also for us with Lily, one of our goals is that people develop relationship and get to know key people in the world working around supervision, like Thomas and Joel, so that can be also a contact for everyone who want to support ICF or want to be engaged in some of these conversations. So Lily, do you want to introduce yourself? I think you know them, but maybe I'm not sure how they know you.
Yeah, I think I know everybody. I see Janet on too. How great is that? And there's two people on phones that I don't know who they are. But welcome to the America's Coaching Supervision Network. Great to see everyone's face. I live in Victoria, BC, beautiful place of the world, and thrilled to be seeing everyone in this, and excited to hear what's going on at ICF in terms of supervision. So welcome, everybody.
Let's just say your name, wherever you are, just jump and just introduce yourself briefly.
Janet Harvey, Whidbey Island, Washington.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm Annie Boyum. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm a CSA graduate supervision coach.
Pat Marham, Tucson, Arizona. Been supervising since 2009.
She's our pioneer in the United States.
I'm glad there's more.
Hi, I'm Joanne Harris from Ottawa, Canada, and I just got my CSA diploma 4 months ago, so pretty happy to move forward.
Mike Frisch in New York. I've been supervising in my own coach training program since 2004. Also, I may be on and off the phone during the meeting. Don't worry about it.
This is Dee Dee Osborne. I'm a Cohort 1 CSA in Aspen Valley in the middle of a big snowstorm.
Here is Teresa Extremadoiro. I was graduated in 2015 in the School of Damian Goldberg as a supervisor.
And I'm Susie Wyman. Right now I'm living in Miami, but I'm from Mexico, and I'll be going back to Mexico in a few months. And also, Vecina Tere, 2015, we graduated from Damian.
This is, I don't have my thing. Yeah, can you hear me? This is Michelle Roy. I'm in Calgary. It's, we just had a snowfall of about 30 centimeters in the past 2 days. It's beautiful. And I've been supervising since 3 years. 3 going on 4. I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Michael Cullen calling from Montreal, about to get the 30 centimeters of snow from Calgary. Thank you very much. PCC, and I'm currently studying coaching supervision at Oxford Brookes.
Hello, I'm Leanne Lowish. I'm calling in from San Francisco, although I'm from New Zealand originally, but I spent 20 years living in the UK. I was in the first CSA cohort, and then I ran the CSA program in the UK, and now I currently train supervisors in Asia and Australia, and but I now live in San Francisco, so I'm excited to be here. And I've met some of you, I think, so looking forward to hearing what we're going to be talking about today.
John Hoover, can you hear me now?
You can.
I'm talking. You can?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for responding. I didn't know. So I'm John Hoover, and I'm just between flights in Austin, Texas, in the airport here, and I'm really glad I was able to get in for a piece of the meeting. And greetings to everyone I know, and it's good to meet all the people I don't know. And I'll be with Lily and Damien, and hopefully Janet and others up in Victoria later this year. And that's all about supervision, right? So,
welcome, John. Lily,
I was in class 1 with. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was in class 1 with Damien, and Janet and Dee Dee and Lily and whoever else is on there. Yeah. Wonderful people, and I'm sure every subsequent class has had equally wonderful people. It's a great organization, and I mentioned, I think before, that I have a new book coming out from Sage in April, and it is forward by Magdalena Mook from ICF, and it is about coaching in organizations and just barely touches upon supervision and what an essential component of supervision is to doing really enterprise-wide coaching. So hopefully we'll write more about that.
Thank you, John. Somebody had the mic open, and we have a lot of sound in the background. So please, we need everybody to mute so we can hear well the person who is speaking. So we don't know. Okay, now it's much better. Thank you. Okay, I think everybody introduced. We have new people coming up where people are just saying their name and where they're calling from. I don't know if the people who just joined us, if you want to introduce yourself, Larissa, maybe somebody else who's joining.
Yeah, I'm also joining by phone. My name is Kim Zovak. I live in Los Angeles. I've been overseas for the last 16 years, and so most of the folks I work with are still overseas. But I'm based here in LA, and I'm a CSA grad person.
Great. Welcome.
Good morning, Larissa from Calgary.
Welcome, Larissa. Anybody else who just joined us? Okay. Yeah.
Good morning. Yes, this is Eliane from Mexico City. Lovely to be here.
Welcome, Eliane.
I'm just waiting for Scott. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello there from just outside of Victoria, Scott Richardson from CSA Cohort 2 in Seattle, and really looking forward to an excellent discussion here. I looked through the slides and they fascinated me, so thank you.
Great, Scott. Welcome. And I think that, as you can see today, we have a majority from Canada, it seems, Lily. So welcome all of our Canadian colleagues. And so Joel and Thomas, do you want to introduce yourself briefly? Say anything you want people to know about both of you that you want people to be aware of?
Sure. I'm Thomas Ketch. I work at ICF Global here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I'm also an ACC coach, and I do research here at ICF. So
great having you with us.
So I'm Joel DiGirolamo, and I've been at ICF, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and been doing research here. And so we have a really strong team of researchers, of which Thomas is one of them. And we've got some really exciting stuff coming up for you folks. So, I mean, not just today, but we've got some really good stuff in the pipeline.
And also, if anybody here is not yet involved and is willing or interested in getting involved in different research projects, Joel is all the time sending a request for people to participate and contribute in different projects that people are doing all over the world. So maybe later then, Joel, if anybody wants to do that, they can reach to you.
Yeah, so the latest study that we have out in the field is some coaching outcome measures. And so we're asking coaches to ask their clients to go ahead and fill out. There's 58 items. It takes 7 or 8 minutes to complete, and we just need data. It'll be using a Roche model, so we need data to calibrate the that model and the items, and we'll be reducing the number of items. So any data helps. So I assume, Damien, you could send out our email afterwards, and then if anybody wants to be on that list, you can actually go in your ICF profile and be put on it, or I can, check the box for you.
Thank you, George. So we leave the session in your hands. You have slides. The idea that you do like a brief presentation, like 20 minutes, and then we open to a conversation and a dialogue with everybody. And we want to finish 5 minutes before the hour to be sure that that's our time frame to the conversation for today.
Okay.
And we need everybody to please turn down your microphones if you still have the microphone on. Lily, I'm still hearing sometimes some noise in the background that I don't think is coming from Thomas or Joe. It may be from one of the phone calls, the line from the phone calls. Okay, so you want to share your screen with your slides?
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Let's see. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so like I said before, my name's Thomas, and Joel is my supervisor, and we did a literature review on coaching supervision that came out in 2017. So this is just a presentation of the overall findings. So we'll go over the history of supervision, differences in supervision across regions, supervision frequency in the UK, and that's where we have most of the data from, various functions and definitions of supervision, mentoring versus supervision, how the ICF defines both of those, some supervision models, best practices, benefits and outcomes of supervision, the question, should supervision be mandatory, and then future research. So a little bit of the history of coaching supervision. So supervision kind of started in social work and counseling fields in Europe, and then that grew, and then it came over to the U.S. And so we like to think that maybe coaching supervision was influenced by that, influenced by clinical supervision, influenced by social work supervision. And the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy actually made supervision during training and ongoing supervision a requirement. And since that, that may have influenced some regional differences in coaching supervision. So for instance, the Association for Coaching and the EMCC have made supervision during training and ongoing supervision a requirement for all members, whereas the ICF currently has no requirements regarding supervision, although we do require mentoring for accreditation. So that may explain some of the differences that we see in coaching supervision today. There is some differences across regions. Although we have very little research on the prevalence of supervision throughout the world, we have some decent statistics from the UK and Europe and Australia, but we have very little data from the rest of the world. Data from the UK in 2006 shows that 86% of the UK coaches believe that coaches should have ongoing supervision, although 44% reported having supervision. So there was a little bit of a discrepancy there. Although new data in 2014 suggests that that number has increased drastically, showing that 92% of coaches in the UK reported having supervision. This growth in supervision may have been attributed to many different factors, two of which might have been cultural differences, which I highlighted previously, but also maybe accrediting body requirements, given that the EMCC and AC require ongoing supervision, whereas the ICF does not. Then this is data from Europe outside of the UK. So again, in 2014, they showed that 81% of European coaches receive supervision. Very similar numbers in Australia in a 2012 study. Although it's important to note that 26% of the Australian coaches were in formal supervision. The rest were in some kind of informal supervision, like peer supervision or group supervision. So they take a little bit of a different approach. Although we don't have a lot of data from the UK and Europe, which differentiates between the types of supervision. So we're not really sure how that looks in other regions. And again, we don't really have a lot of data from the US or other areas, although some studies suggest that supervision in the United States is quite a bit lower than it is in Europe.
So can I just pause for a second? It's Lily. I'm wondering if the slide should be moving.
Yes. Are you seeing the supervision frequency in the UK right now with the two graphs?
We're just seeing differences across regions.
Do you see two graphs now, two bar charts?
Nope. Okay, we got it. Thank you.
Right there, you see it now? Okay. So this is two data points from some recent 2017 studies. These are not in the paper that we published because they're more recent studies. Basically, they looked at supervision frequency in the UK. How often are coaches attending supervision? These two studies used two different scales to measure how frequent coaches were going to supervision, so that's why they look a little different. But we use the Passmore study as a baseline. We use that to kind of scale the other study. So basically, it shows that around half of coaches attend supervision. For every 1 hour of supervision, they have about 1 to 25 hours of coaching. And then other coaches, anything else other than that, they had less supervision. So basically, the most supervision you see is on the DeHaan study. They were going for every 1 hour of supervision, there was 5 hours of coaching, and then 1 hour of supervision per 5 to 8, and then the next one is 10 to 13. So it's 1 hour of coaching supervision for every 10 to 13 hours of coaching. So you can see that these are the frequencies there. That's all the data we really have on how frequent coaches go to supervision. Next, we'll talk about the functions of supervision. So there's really the functions of supervision were mostly adapted from psychology and social work. Hawkins and Smith offers 3 functions that they kind of borrowed from social work, and that's developmental, so developing the skills of the coach, resourcing, which is mostly an emotional support for the coach, and then qualitative, which is like kind of a quality control. And research seems to support these functions fairly well. There's also many different themes and definitions for coaching supervision. You can see here, this is a graph of many of the different popular definitions of coaching supervision, and we looked at the themes. So learning and development was a big theme, reflection and support. Those were the 3 biggest themes there. There's also some definitions that have understanding the client system, so taking a systemic approach to supervision, and we'll talk about later on why that's important. Some people have a lot of questions about ICF mentoring versus ICF supervision, how we define the two. Really, ICF considers mentor coaching to be coaching for the development of one's coaching. So kind of a coach coaching a coach on how to coach, if that makes sense. Mentor coaching is a requirement for ICF accreditation, whereas supervision is not. And here is a chart just kind of comparing mentoring versus supervision. So you can see mentoring is heavy on development of skills, ethical learning, personal development, and then an accreditation requirement, where supervision is a more broad modality, and that includes kind of systemic learning, emotional support, quality assurance, and those types of things. Many supervision models exist. The most popular is the 7-eyed model of supervision. This is by Hawkins and Schwenk. Many have adopted the 7-eyed model. 2 examples of that are the 7 conversations model and the 3 worlds, 4 territories model. There's also other models called the reflective coaching practitioner model, the full spectrum model, the action learning supervision model, and there are actually many others as well. Here's just an overview of Hawkins' 7-eyed model. Basically, it takes the coach, the client, the supervisor, and then it has the coach-client relationship, the coach-supervisor relationship, and then it also takes into account the wider context, kind of taking a systemic view of supervision. The clinical supervision was originally focused on the individual only, but has since evolved to have a more systemic understanding of the client and the overall context for which they operate. This is also true for coaching supervision. So coaching supervision now, a lot of the models take a more systemic approach. And some have argued that this is really important, especially for internal coaches who often have to juggle a lot of different clients at once. So they have the client, they have the overall organization, they have sponsors. And so it might be even more important for internal coaching to have a more systemic approach to supervision. There are no universally accepted best practices, although Hawkins and Schwenk came out with some good practices, which are outlined there. So taking place regularly, having a balance of individual, group, and peer supervision, which they all have their pros and cons, so it's important to kind of have a balance of those. Managing ethics and confidentiality, generate organizational learnings, providing support for the coaches, and that's kind of emotional support. Then the quality assurance, so we're kind of getting back to those functions again, providing professional development, focusing on the client, organization, and coach needs, so taking a more systemic approach. Most of these have been supported by research. Now, some people say, well, okay, so maybe there's not a lot of research in coaching supervision, but what about clinical supervision? Maybe we can borrow some knowledge from the clinical supervision research. Well, clinical supervision research lacks really high quality research demonstrating the efficacy of supervision in clinical setting. Roth and Pilling kind of suggested what a study might include to demonstrate the efficacy of supervision. So some of those factors might be supervisor satisfaction, supervisor support, supervisee satisfaction, and if we're talking in a coaching context, supervisee coaching efficacy, and enhance client outcomes and from coaches undergoing supervision. And this would have to be a randomized study. And they also have best practices in clinical supervision, so that might be something that coaching supervisors can look at and maybe glean some important information from. The same kind of goes for coaching supervision studies. So studying the supervision efficacy is extremely difficult. But there is some anecdotal findings that suggest coaching supervision increases self-awareness, confidence, objectivity, resourcefulness, capability. Many group supervision studies found reduced feelings of isolation with the coaches. And then a recent study, which isn't in the paper, by Grabman and Schumerly, suggests that the resourcing function for supervision, so the support function of supervision, may be especially helpful for neurotic coaches. So they found that coaches who were high in neuroticism tended to react well with supervision. They had better outcomes. Now, should supervision be mandatory? This is kind of the million-dollar question here, and many people are divided on this issue. Coaches are divided, accrediting bodies. Some worry that supervision stifles creativity, breeds conformity, violates confidentiality, has a stigma. And these all were taken from studies that have actually looked into coaches' thoughts on supervision. And yet others believe that supervision could strengthen the profession. So there's arguments on both sides. A study by Salter in 2008 found that of 218 coaches, 63% found that they do not believe it should be mandatory. Again, accrediting bodies are kind of divided on this. EMCC and AC require supervision for accreditation and ongoing supervision. They don't have specific guidelines for how frequent a coach should attend supervision, though. So it's really hard to tell how much they believe coaches should be going to supervision. ICF does not require supervision, but like I stated before, we require mentoring for accreditation. Since there are no robust studies identifying the efficacy of supervision, it's really difficult to support an argument for requiring supervision. So, because we just don't have the data, we don't know how effective it is. Although the ICF does strongly recommend that coaches go to supervision, because we do think it's a very valuable resource. Future research. So an attempt to demonstrate the efficacy of coaching research may be very difficult, but right here we have kind of some outlines of what a study might look like. So we would need to interview 20 to 30 coaching supervisors, and then also 20 to 30 coaches who undergo supervision. So you're looking at about 40 to 60 interviews total. We would take those interviews and then create a quantitative survey that would survey coaching supervisors and coaches and the coaching clients to see how effective coaching supervision is. And we would also have a control group of coaches who are not going under supervision, ongoing supervision, so that we can compare the two groups and see just how effective coaching supervision is. In conclusion, there's not really a lot of consensus on coaching supervision definitions, functions, models, or accrediting body policies. And again, supervision research is still lacking. We need more robust studies to determine the efficacy of coaching supervision. We really don't know the prevalence of coaching supervision outside of Europe, so there needs to be more studies on that. And we also need to establish some best practices for supervision moving forward. So I'll open it up to questions now if anyone has any questions.
Okay, maybe we can just stop sharing the slides so we can get back into the, yes, great, thanks.
I don't know, Joel, if you want to add anything to what Thomas said before we open to conversation, if any other point you want to emphasize? Or
I don't think so. I think you did an excellent job covering it.
I agree.
I have two questions for Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, Thomas, at the beginning, you introduced Joel as your supervisor, and I'm curious in what context you were using that term.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I should have been more clear. He's my boss.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. Very helpful.
Yes.
And the second was that I just near the end there, a couple slides from the back, you said the ICF strongly recommends coaches go to supervision. I think those were your words. And I haven't seen it expressed in so many words on the website, but it was updated recently. Am I missing something? Or
I'll have to pull up a quote here. Let me see.
I agree, Scott, with you. I think that the website be a little bit clearer about that. And that may be a request, Thomas, for you and for both of you, from us, just to see if in the website something can be done to strengthen the language of the message of that strongly recommendation would be very helpful, I do believe, for the profession.
Yeah, so I'm on the website now. It says that we recommend coaching supervision for full-time professional coaches as part of their continuing professional development. One thing that I don't know if a lot of people know about how the ICF views coaching supervision, but we have the CCEs that are required for keeping your credential, and they're broken into different categories. So you need some in core competencies, you need some in, and you can use others outside of core competencies. But I do know that supervision, you can use all 40 hours of your CCEs. You can use supervision for all 40 hours. So that's something that I don't know if a lot of people do know, that supervision is kind of highly regarded as a good CCE.
And it's as core. It is not as other resource. They are all considered core.
You can use them for core ICF competency work for all 40.
And it may change in the future, but for what I know, Thomas, for now you can get units not only being a supervisee, but also as a supervisor. So that may change in the future, but for now you can get units in the two roles. Is that correct? Or this having changed already?
I don't know. Joel, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, the latest that I knew was both as supervisors and mentor coaches. People get units in both roles, being a receiver or offering, because the truth is when you're a supervisor, you're also learning and developing yourself with the work that you do. But that may change in the future. But the latest that I knew is that you can count that. But if you can confirm that, that would be great.
Yeah, I can confirm that. You want me to? I can just shoot you an email.
Yeah, that would be great, and I will confirm that with everybody.
One question: What do we need to do in order to offer this CCE to our clients as supervisors?
I would have to contact the credentialing department, but I believe that if they just when they turn in their CCEs, if they just say, hey, I was in supervision with this supervisor for this many hours, I think that's all you have to do, but I'll have to check on that, and I can email Damien and confirm that.
And Pat, who has been the pioneer and he has been for the first day talking about supervision at ICF, can answer that too.
Well, what I've been doing is sending each of my supervisees a letter at the end of the year or at some other point where they may be requesting an update with the hours that we have done and stating that it is core. That's for their records, but according to what I understand, yes, it just is a matter of filling it in on the form, but they have something to support that from me.
So this is my understanding too, Elia, and there is nothing formal about it. There is not a requirement from ICF. The requirement is that when people apply and they put the name of the supervisor, the credential of the supervisor, and if you want to reinforce that with a letter, that's great. But I don't think it's a requirement, a formal requirement.
It may be at some point, though, that they have to post something proving it, just like they do from a CCE course or something. So I'm ready.
Okay, that's great. They're very overdoing it and underdoing it. Any questions about the research that Thomas presented today?
I think one of the issues might be that we still don't have a whole lot of clients who've had supervisees who've had 2 years of supervision. So that's going to be one of the issues about collecting data for the people that you say would be the best participants in that. That's something we have to grow.
Yeah, it would be really hard to do a study on the efficacy of supervision, and we actually looked into it, and it would be very extensive. There's just a lot of moving pieces. You have the supervisor, you have the coach, then you have the coaching clients. And you would really need to look at the coaching clients because unless the coaching clients are seeing an increase in the efficacy of the coach's coaching, then you can't really say that supervision is effective. So if it's not affecting the client, the coaching client, then it's really hard to say that supervision is effective. And so there's a lot of moving pieces there, and the dropout rate of those types of studies are very high. It would be an incredibly large study.
The best bet might be to work with internals because they're probably doing some kind of ROI statistics on their coaches anyway.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And for many years, we didn't have any information about coaching itself, like efficacy of coaching.
Right.
So we can also bring that in some way to the awareness. So Didi, you have your hand raised for.
If I'd like to add on to that though briefly. I mean, as Thomas says, you've got clients, you've got coaches, you've got supervisors. So you got 3 tiers here, whereas in a normal coaching study you would have coaches and clients. And so adding the third person on makes it really a lot harder. And as Thomas says, with dropouts, in a longitudinal study, it could be really difficult. But Pat, I think that's a really good idea. Starting with internal coaches might be a really productive way to do it.
So did you have a hand raised, and then Michael?
And Michael? Yes, I was struck by the comment about high in coaches. That's high on the neuroticism scale. Do well with supervision. And from an intuitive kind of research perspective, I work with clients who have ratings on the N scale. Let's say highly reactive versus not reactive, we could say, on that dimension. And of course, more effectiveness is in the middle. And if you look at the coachees who are high in, just working with a coach who's less reactive is helpful in a developmental way to be less reactive. By the same token, a coach who tends to be very reactive benefits from working with a supervisor who's less reactive, right? Not more reactive. So I would think, now that's all measurable on instruments, right? So that would be interesting to see if the whole coaching supervision process for everyone who's involved moves in a more moderating direction.
And I can unpack that study a little more if you're interested. So
yes, please.
There were 2. So basically what they measured was, so they measured the coach's neuroticism, and they also measured negative impact of coaching. So they looked at, did clients have negative experiences? And I'm talking about, when I say clients, I mean coaching clients. Did clients have a negative experience in coaching? What were the coach's perceptions of how the client had negative outcomes. So it's from the client's perspective, it's from the coach's perspective about the client. And then they took those groups and they took the coaches and they put them through supervision. And they said, okay, they showed that coaches who are higher in neuroticism tend to view their clients as having negative outcomes. So they really worry, did I do a bad job? Did I do a bad job at coaching? And they found that coaches who are high in neuroticism tend to think that their coaches had bad outcomes, that they had bad experiences in coaching, whereas coaches who had low neuroticism didn't seem to think that. They didn't think that their clients had bad outcomes. And actually what was really interesting is they found very little correlation between the coach's perception of how the client experience and the client experience. So in other words, a lot of the coaches were way off. The clients may have had great experiences and the coaches thought that they didn't. So anyway, so what they did was they put the coaches through supervision, and they found that the coaches with high neuroticism, who were really worried about the impact that their coaching had on their clients, they found that after going through supervision, they believed that their clients had better outcomes. So they were able to let go of this idea that they were bad coaches, basically. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but basically they were allowed to let go of this feeling that, oh, my clients are having terrible outcomes. And so it really supports the supportive function of supervision in the sense that it's reassuring to the coach. They're a little calmer about how they're doing as a coach. And so that's really what that study showed. So.
And that's fascinating, because the other aspect of people who are high on the neuroticism scale tend to be more attuned to negative emotion in their environment than people who are on the other end don't even notice there's any kind of conflict or negative emotion, right? But culturally, it's interesting that the people on the low end are seen as better adjusted than the people on the high end. And so I would think that supervision and coaching in general, that would be a big piece of the development, the personal development aspect. I appreciate. What is the reference for that? Maybe you could put it on the chat.
Yeah, I'll put it on the chat for sure.
I think it's also in the slides. I think you have information.
Yeah, it is in the slides.
Is it? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So Michael, you have a question.
Yeah, my concern, of course, is how you're measuring it based on a non-definition of supervision. If there's no universally accepted definition of supervision, how can you measure it? And so I'm just wondering if you could just elaborate on that in terms of, even in your studies, are you putting forth a definition of supervision, and in that way it can be measured?
So the only study that we've actually done was the literature review on supervision. So we didn't, we've just looked at the definitions. We looked at the research that was out there. But you bring up a good point, and it is really hard to do a study on supervision if there isn't a universal definition for it. A lot of times when that's the case in research, what they'll do is they'll just give a definition of coaching. This is the definition we're using for this study, and then they'll do the study. But yeah, you're right. That is a big problem, and also a lack of best practices as well. It's like, well, if there aren't best practices for supervision, then how are we really able to tell good supervision versus poor supervision? Because, it's so, yeah, you bring up a good point.
Yeah, and it kind of strikes me the parallel of coaching when it first started, the idea that if an employee was sent to coaching, it was remedial. In the way that coaches now are going to supervision, it's a sense of, oh, maybe it's going to be critical of the way I coach. And jumping ahead to your slide 32 and 33, there is that aspect of vulnerability and criticism and everything that goes with it, which I found quite surprising, given that I think as coaches, we encourage that in our clients in order to get greater awareness and self-understanding. So that issue, of course, comes up too.
And that's the stigma around the word supervision. If we hyphenate it, though, or help the coach hyphenate it, there's a better sense of that. But it's the dilemma between what people were asking about Thomas and Joel there in the beginning. What actually role was that?
Yeah, and there's a big discussion in the literature too about the word supervision. You know, does it hurt the profession? Does it hurt the view of supervision? And there was some people say, well, I think we're just stuck with the word. I think at this point we're stuck with it. I don't think it's going anywhere. But yeah, you're right that there is a perception issue there with the word.
Yeah, I also want to add something else, and that is this difficulty about the definition of supervision and being able to research the efficacy of it. In the clinical space, they've had this problem for decades, and they are still struggling with it. They're getting, they're farther along than we are, but we are not alone.
And I was thinking about the study. This is a question about the study that you propose. That sounds interesting as a possibility, and probably can be expensive to develop a research like that. But the question for me will be, how will you know that really it's supervision will make the difference? There are so many other variables that can be at play, that how you can really compare to the group that is not going through supervision. How will you know at the end that really supervision what will make the difference? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point, and that is a struggle. So, you would have to try to isolate supervision as best as you can. So, the ideal situation, of course, would be that you have coaches who are going to supervisors, and that's the only thing they're doing for personal development is supervision. Then you would have a control group who wasn't doing anything for their professional development. They weren't doing supervision, they weren't doing mentor coaching, they weren't doing self-reflection or anything. Again, in the real world, that's probably not as possible, but you would try to minimize those variables as best you could.
This is Michelle. There's a part of me, maybe it's my neurotic self, but there's a part of me that just loves that we can't name it. We can't put it in a box. I just love it that supervision is this kind of third entity that's not we can't quite capture it, and it's there's something in me that just sort of celebrates that in a big way. Not that I'm against research and I love science, but there's something about science that I think as we learn in other physics and they miss things. There's things that are missed, and some things can be big, and I don't know. There's I need to think about it more, but I really appreciate the conversation, and there's a part of me that really thinks. And the other thing is, what about doing? It's kind of in a way the research on supervision, because there's not enough mass data and experience supporting it. It's in a way I see it as putting the cart before the horse. Not that we shouldn't do it. Or, I'm not dissing it. It's just the idea that let's create this grassroots. So the research is coming out of something, a need from people who are absolutely engaged in it and living it and experiencing it. And I'm sure that's what's happening now. But to have a mass movement around that might be powerful. So those are some thoughts I wanted to throw out there. And
it sounds like we need to keep the art along with the science.
Yes.
Okay. What you speak to also is also relevant to coaching research in general. I mean, coaching is really hard to put into a box too. And it's interesting doing this research in coaching and supervision. Just it's squishy it's not so cut and dry, and it's both a challenge and a privilege for coaching researchers or just social science researchers in general. So,
Okay, I'm going to call Kim next because she has something to say. And then I think we had a couple of points in the chat box. And then Michael, you got your hand up too. Kim, are you there? Yep. Are you there? Great, I can hear you.
Yay. Hey, my question was just related to the research. It appears that, well, I'm curious, you mentioned that coaching supervision can't be required because of the difficulty doing the research, and that completely makes sense to me. How was it determined then with the ICF that mentor coaching was required? And I would think that there could be a possibility, particularly for those who are re-credentialing and at higher credentials, to be able to substitute coaching supervision for mentor coaching. Curious what's been happening on that front.
Well, one thing about the difference between how the ICF views mentoring versus coaching, versus supervision, is that mentoring is only required for the accreditation. So it's not really a requirement beyond that, whereas supervision is an ongoing requirement for the EMCC and the AC. And I can't speak to why they differentiate those two things, but I would think that because it's required for an accreditation, it's more about developing the coach as opposed to someone who has more of an established practice. So it's like in the early stages of becoming a coach, it's more about development. It's the focus is a little more on development and learning ethics and those kinds of things, as opposed to the broad range of things that supervision covers. But I'll turn to Joel. I don't know if Joel, do you have anything else to add to that? Or
I think that's a really good answer, and that's how I would have responded with what you're talking about at the end, and that is that self-development aspect of it, and that it is more focused with mentoring. So. Yeah, but yeah, that was before both our time.
So do you have MCC coaches that balk at that requirement because they're doing regular supervision, and yet they come into a space and think, oh, I need to do mentor coaching? And my guess is for many of us, those things, we have work with supervisors who are willing to kind of do both. But I would think that.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed is that coaches at different levels do different things in mentoring in supervision. And I don't know, Thomas, you can probably articulate that better than
I want to weigh in here because I was on the committee when they wrote the original mentoring definition, and what they did was decide to leave it exactly on the core competencies, development of the core competencies only. That's a small part of what supervision does. And so there's no guarantee that in supervision that the concentration on skill development, it's coach development as well, but it really is skill development to move it up to those higher levels. I admit that awareness and those sorts of things, coach itself is part of that, but there's no real way to measure that. So it was really about the skill development piece only. And supervision wasn't around that much in the early days anyway. And there are people that are very convinced that they're the same thing.
We need to start wrapping up because we are getting closer to the hour. So Lily, where are we? You're on mute. Lily, you're on mute.
Oh, Michael's up on deck, and then there's a few comments in the chat box. Maybe Joel, if you can have a look, a couple of them are asking you some questions.
Yeah, I want to address two things there. There was, I really like that comment about describe what supervision isn't, and we'll definitely take that back. And then the other thing is about a directory of supervisors, and I have no idea where we are on that, and we can take that back as well. So appreciate that.
Okay, Michael, and then we're wrapping up.
Okay, just to Pat's point, yeah, I understand mentor coaching also to be focused on the 11 core competencies of ICF. So in the absence of coaching supervision definition, what are the things being measured? And to Thomas's point about developmental and skills development, I do definitely see that as part of CPD, continuous professional development. And that's certainly how I propose coaching supervision to coaches who are interested in saying, well, what's this about? Is it mentor coaching? I said, no, it's continuous professional development. What aspects of your coaching? And that can cover a myriad of aspects. So that for me was a big part of it. The other part, I guess, coming up for me is this idea of supervision. So lawyers need it, nurses need it, accountants need it as part of their recertification and ongoing development. Doesn't matter how accomplished you are. So I'm just wondering if it would be prudent to kind of measure or to compare, contrast other definitions of supervision in other professions to help galvanize and concretize this nebulous definition of supervision. I prefer to call it stewardship myself. I find it's a little nicer in terms of definition, and it talks about the art and the science and the practicality of what we do. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, we did delve a little bit into the clinical supervision side of things, but we didn't really delve into any other professions outside of that. So that might be a really fruitful thing to look at.
I'll add to that. I think that is a really good point. And in fact, we've been, for the last couple months or so, looking at our competency model and comparing it to other organizations' professionals' competency models to look for commonalities and other things that we can be doing together. And to broaden that a little bit and to look at this supervision piece, I think is definitely worthy.
2 weeks ago, IOC had a webinar with doctors talking about coaching coming in for doctors. And they needed, so there was that definition too. So there's a real need for it in the medical world too. So that's an aspect that definitely the IOC seems to be taking some traction on.
All right, that was quite a great conversation. Thank you everyone for participating. It's an ongoing debate, I guess, and so it was good to hear ICF's position on this. Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Thomas, for coming to talk with our community. This is recorded, so if anybody wants that, just let me know. We're going to probably post it somewhere at some point, right, Damien?
And I want to let everybody know 2 resources. One, in the website of ICF, there is a section that explains the differences between supervision and mentor coaching. So I highly recommend everybody to become familiar with that. And there is also a video that Pat did with Sam a few years ago, where they spent a whole hour webinar on the differences between mentor coaching and supervision. You can access that in YouTube. That's available also if you want to go deeper in the differences and distinctions. And what before we go briefly, Lily, what announcement do we have that you want to make?
Oh, I don't even have the list. There's something happening in March.
Well, first in February, we have Terry doing a mastermind group on how to develop some awareness and business of supervision. So if anybody is interested in participating, I sent everyone an information with that. It's a mastermind group, it's a discussion, reflection, and coming up with some ideas. And then in March, on March 15th, we have somebody coming from EMCC to talk about the competencies of the coach supervisor. So even though we don't have best practices, Joel and Thomas were sharing with us, there's still a competency model where coaching supervisors should be demonstrating some skills. So they are going to be presenting this model and get feedback from everybody to think to what extent these competencies represent or not the work that we are doing as supervisors. So I think that will be an interesting conversation. And then we have a conference. Lily, it's almost sold out. So how many seats do we have? 3 seats?
Yeah, I think there's 3 seats left on the conference in April. So if anyone's interested, now's the time to step into that space. I know many of you are coming, so I'm excited to actually meet you in person.
And thanks again, Thomas and Joel, for being with us today. Do you want to write down in the chat room your emails so everybody can take it from there right now? So eventually we will share that with everyone. But if you write your emails in the chat room, in that way everybody can see them now and copy and paste and have them handy. So if everybody wanted, you take a minute and you copy and you select, copy and paste, and you can in that way have their 2 emails. So thank you. This is more for Thomas and Joel to send emails for us to contact them. Okay, that's the idea. So thank you again, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, we'll see you in March, March, yes, right. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
you guys. Thanks so very much.
Thanks.
Take care. Thank you.